So today, so I learned recently that in the year 1368, King Charles, King Charles VI was born, and at the age of 11 years old became king. I mean, talk about responsibility, right? 11 years old, he became king of France and served for 42 years, basically until his death. And he was nicknamed sometimes Beloved, which I guess, for a king, that's typical. But the other name that was given to him, because he suffered from mental illness, the other name that was given to him was the Mad, Le Fou, like in French. And so the way that this mental illness presented in King Charles's life is that there was a time when being king, he forgot his own name. He forgot even that he was king. So imagine that, this experience. He forgot his own name. And as I was reading about King Charles, I was thinking about my talk on type 9. Like there's a way in which the type 9 at the very top of the Enneagram represents the point of consciousness in all of us that is the point of self-forgetting. Complete self-forgetting, right? To where we don't remember our divine nature. We don't remember that we are king, as we teach here in Unity that each and every person is fully divine. It's not Jesus over there, but it's the Christ in each of us, the Buddha nature in each of us, and we have forgotten that. And so I think about how, in a way, we all live out that madness of the Mad King. But then later on in King Charles's life, we come to find that he experienced another kind of madness. It was called the glass delusion. The glass delusion, which was prevalent back then, and he kind of, made it known or popularized, if you will. And this delusion is the delusion that your own body is made of glass and is so fragile then that it could be shattered. And so being a king, when he remembered, right? Being a king, he was able to have his garments have rods attached to them because he was so afraid that if anybody ran into him, it would break or shatter him. And so he walked around with rods in his clothing, his garments. And as I read that part about King Charles, I thought about type 3 and how the type 3 is like the achiever on the Enneagram, right? The performer, that which is on stage, that which is succeeding all the time. Like that's the 3's sort of role in this world. The 3 is a leader in the world. But behind all of that is this scared little child, which is the soul child of the type 3. And that's what I'd like to focus on today. Not just, again, for the type, but to recognize that archetypally, each of these types also represent an aspect in conscious in all of us, where the 9 represents the part of us that forgot our unity with spirit. The 3 is the aspect in us that then projects an image, robes ourselves with certain garments that we present to the world. And in that doing so, we forget. There's an even more profound forgetting of our true identity. We become identified with our personality type, with the image, with the garment, with the crown, with that mask that we present to the world. And so I want to share today about the journey home for the 3 and how that can teach us something about our journey home to our true nature. So 9 integrates toward 3, 3 integrates toward the 6, and we'll talk about those characteristics in a second. So first, we'll explore the characteristics of the type 3. We'll look at how embracing fear, which is the main characteristic at type 6, is a way home for the 3, and for all of us, really, at some level. And then what the personality type 3 looks like in integration, because this is a series on wholeness and the Enneagram. Like, what do we in our humanity, filled with our spirituality, inextricably linked to our divinity, how do we look when we're integrated, when we're whole? So we'll journey through that, and I'll just touch on that tidbit that in the end, this embracing of vulnerability kind of helps us come into this integrated self. So we begin with the type 3. Now, the type 3 in the Enneagram is usually, it's actually a big deal when a 3 sits down into a spiritual community, because 3s don't often sit down, right? They're busy doing things constantly. The 3, sometimes when they say the Enneagram can be applied to countries, the United States can be seen as a 3 country. Ambition, success, but to the outer markers of success, right? What are the boxes that I need to check depending on my society? Now, a 3 that grows up in a little, very woo-woo and hippie culture might, as a marker of success, not be like the accomplished businessman or woman, right? That 3 might be like the best hippie, the best garbed hippie there is. Right? So, but the marker is to look outside of myself for the things that the people around me, deem like successful or worthy or accomplished, and then to model my life after those markers of success. And there is this idea that we wear a mask for so long that we forget what's behind it. And so the core passion or vice of the 3 is this deceit, but not necessarily deceiving other people. It's a self-deceit. Like this I've lied about who I am, and I can't even remember anymore. And at the beginning of my spiritual journey, when people are like, be yourself, I'm like, who is that? I don't even know. Right? And so in the midst of that anxiety, if you will, the terror of not knowing, the fear that this mask, this crown, this robe, what I wear that I present to the world, that, sort of the emperor has no clothes, it's this idea that once you disrobe me, there's nothing there, because I can't sense into anything there, because I've been so focused on the outer world, right? And so each of us, in a certain way, has this persona. Some of us don't have the persona of success and greatness. Some of us actually have the persona of, woe is me, the suffering one, right? Or we might have the persona of the protector, the strong one, like the 8 on the Enneagram. We, as a 1, often, for much of my life, the persona is like of perfection. I'm going to try to be immaculate so nobody criticizes me. And so there becomes a time where it's like you don't even remember who you really are anymore. You don't even remember your human nature, much less your spiritual nature, because you've been so busy upholding this image. And I want to say this image applies to everyone, because some of the types were like, oh no, well, I just like to blend in. 9s on the Enneagram, they love blending in. So that's part of your persona. I'm not going to be that shiny one. I'm going to be the person that looks like the wallpaper. But that's still being attached to the persona or the mask, right? And so I'm going to invite you to consider now the ways in which, you might even do it in the form of like, oh, well, that doesn't feel like me, like the way I dress, like that clothing doesn't look like me, or that car. There are ways in which we associate with certain things that are like our identity. And we think that's us, when in a way we're limiting ourselves by saying, this is me, and everything out there can't be me, right? And so we take a look at that. For each of us, the way we wear this persona is for the 3. The journey of moving from a compulsion of doing enough in the world to finally one day feel lovable because of the lost childhood message. There's a slide for this one of the three. The three in particular, we all face this to some degree, but the three lost the message that you are loved for yourself. Not because you did anything awesome or wonderful, not because of winning all of those tennis matches in high school or winning at football, not because of the trophies or the awards, but simply for the truth of who you are. You are loved for yourself was the lost message. And because of that, the three moves itself away from that, the fear that, oh my gosh, I'm not lovable. I'm not intrinsically valuable. And you can move so far away that you don't even feel afraid. All you know is you're compulsively doing. You're compulsively achieving. And you don't know why. You cannot stop all the efforts to become lovable. When the truth is, it's because there's a fear that you've so layered over with all these garments and all these rods and all the strong protective barrier that you can't even know or feel into that fear anymore, right? You are loved for yourself, the truth for every human being. And so for each of us, let's take a look around the whole Enneagram. The type 1 has a version of this. Unless I'm perfect, I'm not okay. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable, says the personality construct for the type 1. For the type 2, unless you deny your needs and support everybody else's, unless you're that I have no needs person, then you're not worthy. You're not lovable. You're not okay. And so we skip over to the type 4. And this actually can kind of reverse itself, where the 4's egoic identity is often linked to being the long-suffering one, right? The one who's in so much pain because there's some story in there around, if I'm in enough pain, someone will come and help me, right? And so I get locked in this mask of pain when sometimes joy feels to me like it's not real. Joy can feel like it's not real. So wow, the barrier that I create to my own wholeness in that. For the Enneagram type 5s, there's this delusion that somehow if I just know enough, if I learn enough, I will be okay. I will have this degree of stability and security that will make me feel okay in the world. And so the 5 as a head type will kind of journey into more reading, right? More learning, compulsively, not recognizing that there's an underlying fear of fragility, of being shattered or broken behind that. The type 6 is the type that will most often be directly connected to its own fear. And so it can be conscious of its fear. But the egoic identity that the 6 can often latch onto is that it doesn't actually know its own knowing, if you will, its own wisdom. There's a part of it that's missing from its life. And so not being able to fully delve into the light side of its shadow, if you will. The type 7 on the Enneagram, the enthusiast, the spontaneous and playful type, that type is so attached to I have to be the life of the party, right? If I'm not having fun, something's terribly, terribly wrong. And the fear is actually that if I go into the sad emotions or the negative emotions, that I will break, right? And so what we see as just this lively, happy persona is someone who is just so afraid, deeply afraid of being still enough to recline into that shadow side of itself, if you will. And so we keep up this facade of cheerful, happy, happy, positive, right? And then the 8 on the Enneagram is the type that says that until it goes on a conscious journey, it says, my strength, my power, my controlling of the world is the way that I'm going to hold myself up, it hold my persona. And in that, I have totally relegated my vulnerability to that space over there. Deep down, boy, as an 8, do I want to be loved and cherished and held. But I don't even know how, because I've so run from my own vulnerability and fearfulness over there that I'm out over here looking like I don't need a thing from anybody. And in fact, if you get near me, I will hurt you, says the 8, in this sort of misguided, wondering why it never gets to be held, right? And then the Enneagram type 9, we go back to the type 9, just has this deep fear, that if I'm actually not valuable because I'm not connected to source, then the 9's persona latches onto outer people. I'm going to merge with my environment. That's why I want to blend in, because I'm not valuable. And so I get attached to this outer merging. Sometimes with a romantic partner, sometimes with a social group, sometimes with my physical environment. If you've ever seen a 9 sit down on a sofa, and just relax, 9s are really good at that, right? Just to be able to shut down. Why? Because there's a merging with the outer that helps to keep them from the fear of, oh my God, if I get disconnected from the outer, this is why 9s hate conflict so much. If there's a disconnection with the outer, there's nothing for me, it feels like in the beginning, right? So each of us constructed this way in which this existential, profound fear doesn't ever truly get felt. And then not getting felt, we run from the very source of our wholeness, right? That we never fully find in the world. I'll never be perfect enough to feel loved. The 3 never does enough to feel worthy, right? The 2 never gives enough to finally feel like it's going to deserve. These misguided paths that we each take. When the journey of the 3 is this emblematic journey that helps us all to remember that mask that we each wear, that personality with which we have become identified as ourselves, but which isn't our true self back there, that the journey back is a journey of embracing fear itself. And I remember, it's Roosevelt who said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And the way that this shows up in the Enneagram is that somehow, by being willing to embrace fear, we start journeying back home. If you could go back a slide, please, at the inner triangle, 9, 3, 6. So the 9 represents the point, the archetypal point at which we believed we separated from our source. The 6 represents, the terror of that. And the 3 represents the mask that we put on to cover up that terror. But we have to journey back through the 6, all of us, to come back home to ourselves. That painful journey. So let's look at what that looks like for the 3. If you've ever met a type 3, if you're familiar with the Enneagram, usually at the average level of health, these 3s look fearless. When there's a goal to be had, they are the ones charging in. They are the people, elected in school for all the leadership roles, right? The 3 is busy doing all the time, usually has a big checklist, and usually gets it all done. There's a sense of always being powerful, always being confident. From the outside, a 3 looks really put together and confident. But interestingly enough, the soul child of the 3, which is represented at point 6, is the opposite. And in some ways more fearful than the rest of us. Why? Because anything that we dismiss and repress goes into the shadow aspect of ourselves, goes into the dark. And what stays in the dark never has room to grow and heal. And so the fear in the 3 can look different from the fear in all of us, in that when the 3 first encounters its fear, it's a shy and timid and really scared little child that's in there. And so when the 3 first goes in there, this is not good news. You know, it's like, why should I go here? I was doing all right, succeeding in the world, and sure, I'm exhausted. But to encounter this child who just wants to cower in a corner and not do anything is what happens when a 3 first welcomes and embraces its fear. And I know even as someone who's not a 3, I can connect with that sense of, it's terrifying to walk into fear and to feel like it can paralyze us. So why should we even go there? It doesn't feel like this is good news. It doesn't feel like this is improving my life, right? But whatever was in the dark first arises in its most immature state. And so that's why many of us who start on this journey, you know, it's a big group in the beginning and it becomes a narrower gate in the end, right? The people who last and endure, because we have to journey through the absolute terror of entering into the cave, right, where the dragons are, the thing that we fear most. And so what happens for a 3, those of us who know 3s in our lives, we can have deep compassion for how fear might show up in a very infantile way in the beginning. Just like we had compassion last week for how for a 9, sometimes when the 9's first embracing its stardom, it talks a little too much, right? Because it's still finding its voice. It's still needing to be visible and seen. But we're going to make room for that as a community to hold space. We're going to make space for the 3 likewise, and for the 3 aspect in all of us that's like, oh my goodness, I'm terrified. Can I make space for the 3 in my own consciousness? To be afraid of the dark, even irrationally. And what happens when we do? What happens is this amazing marvel of how that which was in the dark becomes conscious now. And when it becomes conscious, it can be skillfully managed, right? So it's not so much that the 3 or the 3 in us embraces and says, well, yeah, I'm going to act based on fear now. It's that through making fear conscious, through really looking at it with courage, with profound courage, through our willingness to be open in our communities with our fragility, to say sometimes that we don't know how to do something. To say sometimes to our partners, to our coworkers, that we need from them. To admit that. To admit that we're scared. To admit that maybe we who were the smart and competent one actually don't know the next steps. I read a story, there's a book called Megatrends, 2010, written by Patricia Aberdeen, that talks about how corporate executives who were waking up and becoming conscious finally were breaking through something that was actually hurting corporate culture, which is that these individual leaders who were becoming conscious were saying at some points in the journey of their corporation's life when things were rough. I mean, there was a time when things were rough and the boss just took it on, right? The boss was just like, just go down with the ship, the captain that goes down with the ship, and nobody knows why it went down because nobody opened up about what was broken or wrong. And so in her book, Patricia Aberdeen shares these stories about the executives of HP and GM and other companies. Starbucks had this happen where the executives walked into the boardroom and said, I don't know how to fix this. Wow. For a leader to say that. But Starbucks in particular has a wonderful story that you can just find online about how that started them on the path of recovering, because then everybody could come in to help. People who didn't know that their views were cherished could come in and support. People who didn't know that you need them could come in and support you if only you could encounter your own vulnerability and fear enough to say, I'm not sure. I don't know. I make mistakes. I break things. I drop things. I drop the ball. Instead of hiding over here with the mask, everything's fine. Right, everything's fine. What if we opened up? How different would we be, and how different would the world be? How different is it when we finally go to this place of like, oh, yeah, as a type 3, I fear to death that I'm going to fail, and that failure means you will not love me. I've shared a story before how as the perfectionist, one of my very first services was a Wednesday service at my home church in California. And I can tell you, I was such the overachiever. It's like having to be better than. I felt that I had given a mediocre Wednesday talk, like mediocre. And the shame that overwhelmed me at the end, and I was dating someone at the time, and I remember believing, like in my body, believing that he would leave me. I mean, I felt that. Like, I felt like, oh, I'm never going to become a minister now, you know? I was a kid back then. I was just beginning my journey, and I had done, like, and people were even coming up and saying, oh, that was a beautiful service, and I'm like, I did a mediocre talk, you know, I'm doomed. And that, but in the moment of sort of my brokenness, in the moment of us failing in the ways that our ego wants the most to succeed, we have a space in which when we embrace community, when we let other people love us and we let them in and we let them be there for us, then something begins to heal, right? But it doesn't if we don't crack, if you will. And sometimes we crack without wanting to. And other times it's us opening our hearts and saying, hey, last week, you know, in Unity, where we herald like this positivity, if you will, you know, there's a part of every Unity minister, I think, that wants to just present as, see, I've made it. You know, I've reached this point where I am at peace, always, you know. And so last week, I mean, and I post a lot of successes on Facebook. I post about like, oh, look, you know, I won this, I got this. And so it really struck me that last week when I was in a lot of pain from recent transitions in my life and struggles, and I've shared publicly that, you know, my husband and I, you know, are going through a divorce right now. And that my mom in November was diagnosed with breast cancer, and feeling the fragility of my own being, and then realizing that, oh my goodness, you know, I had come to Missouri to go to school, and then I started working. I didn't build a life for myself. Like, I didn't have friends like outside church. So I have felt lately the fragility of starting over and like building a life, you know, and venturing sort of out in the world in a way where there's this sense of, oh, it's just me now, you know? And that aloneness, I just felt sad last week. And so instead of just feeling sad, I shared it. And I didn't necessarily share it just to like get, you know, people's love, although that was important. I also shared it in part because I wanted people to know they're not alone if they're sad, you know? Like, that if you're hurting, that like, I share enough of what's good that there might be people who think that, oh my gosh, she just has a special life. You know, that's not like me, and I'm different. I'm especially wounded. I'm especially, you know, and to help, so to connect in both ways, but yes, also to receive love and prayers. And that's a very vulnerable place for someone who's supposed to be the boss. You know, for someone who's supposed to lead the charge toward peace, happiness, and joy. And it'd be like, yeah. And yet for me, there was something so deeply whole about being at a place in my life where I can say, you know what? I'm struggling. And even in that, when a friend, offered to just hold me and hug me, and there is a part of me that's like, you're going to do this, and then you're going to leave tomorrow because I'm too needy. Like the story about like just wanting to be like hugged or held once, in the midst of a job where I'm the leader. Like, where do I lean in? Where do I soften it? And so recognizing that, the beauty of that meant that something in me got to be integrated, right? If I can feel into my fragility and my wholeness, I can start making my way back into like the stillness that allows me to feel like one with people. Not when I have a big garment and robes and rods around me that are built on perfectionism, right? But only when I fall back into the space where then I can feel my oneness with spirit, beyond the fear, up back into the oneness of self. And so, not surprisingly, the Enneagram Type 3, which is the most competitive of the Enneagram types, when the 3 starts to face this fragility within itself, this fear of like, I am nothing behind all this accomplishment. I'm nothing behind my trophies. That when it comes to that, its integration at point 6, after it moves through fear, starts to embody the highest qualities of a 6. And those of us who know and love our 6s know that 6s are not anything but amazing team players. 6s know how to sort of be a part of community. They are the most loyal among us. And so a 3, which was competitive, a 3 is so competitive when it starts on its spiritual journey, it makes spirituality first a competition, right? How many 3s, it's like you have this orientation around being the best, and then you come to spirituality, I'm going to be the best meditator. I'm going to be the best. Like that's the beginning of the journey, and that's okay. But the journey has to move. So enlightenment becomes yet another goal for the 3, right? But that starts to shift as the 3 integrates sort of its fear of what would it be if it was not the best at what it does? What if someone else beat it? Someone else is more enlightened, right? Someone else is more peaceful, meditated longer, And so the 3 moves into this owning of itself and its fear and comes into this amazing collaborative spirit. It's the executive leader who now knows how to tap into every single person working in the organization and equalize him or herself and be one with that. And so the leader knows the journey shared in the story of the rabbi that says, talks about going into a forest. It says in the story told in the Hasidic Jewish tradition that says, oh my goodness, this forest is scary, but let me hold your hand through it and we will walk each other home. The 3 that used to want to run the race and get home before everyone else starts to come into not just a wholeness and a oneness, but a sense of greater unity with all people. And so in this, we find this cherished experience within ourselves that those of us who separate through whatever, I'm the smartest, I know the most, I'm the most tragic, whatever it is that separating self in the woods, when you really face the fear and open up to the vulnerability of that, there's a preciousness in the ways in which then other people don't become the other, the competitor, the judger of you anymore, but somehow they become fellow sojourners. And then we can join together in this sort of unity of spirit and remember how we support each other in remembering that you don't have to run, you don't have to hide from who you are, but instead you are loved as yourself, that you are lovable as who you are. We can offer that to others only when we allow ourselves the space to feel that which we run from, to embrace that wholeness And in embracing that wholeness, embrace the universality of our fears within ourselves, and then somehow find that the world isn't something to oppose, to give endlessly to, as the twos think, to achieve endlessly in, as the threes think, to be scared of, as the six thinks, but instead to be a journey of everyone sort of walking each other home. And so